All right, all right. With that being said, what's going on, everybody? If you don't know, now you do know. You're officially tuned into a very special edition of the HFWB podcast series. And once again, this episode of the HFWB podcast series is being brought to you by my sponsor, goandfeelgreat.com, where we have natural products designed to help restore your metabolic health, lower your glucose levels, control your cholesterol levels, improve your health, and lose weight overall. And basically, it's natural based. So that's how you can learn how to go and feel great for the long haul. Once again, this episode of the HFWB podcast series is being brought to you by my sponsor, goandfeelgreat.com. Once again, go visit them, goandfeelgreat.com. But with that being said, the person who I'm about to bring on to the HFWB podcast series today, he's a man of many talents. I mean, the man was an athlete. He was a former sports scientist, and he's currently an instructor to kind of lead and educate on the science of autophagy and longevity, which we're going to get into all about today here on this episode particularly. And the man who I'm about to bring on, he's regarded as a human performance and a longevity leader known for making the complex simple on just overall longevity itself. Because I said this before and I'll say this again, it's all about adding more years to your life versus taking away years of your life. And this is going to be an interesting topic because science has been implied to enhance the overall well-being, and his work speaks for itself. And it's just, I'm honored to have this individual on to the HFWB podcast series to, of course, talk about the products, spermidine, which we're going to get into as far as what it is, how it helps extends your lifespan and health span, and why it's basically overall important to human longevity. And what a better gentleman to bring on to explain it than the director of Appliance Science and Longevity Labs Incorporated, Mr. Don Moxley. Welcome aboard to the HFWB podcast series. How's it going, my friend?
It's going well, Clifton. I'm excited to be here with you and your tribe.
I appreciate that. I just thank you for, again, just making time out of your busy schedule just to, of course, inform us on, of course, not only your overall story and as far as how far you've come, but currently where you are and how much more you have to go down the road. But for the people who are listening to the HFWB podcast series, Don, and who want to know, who is Don Moxley, the individual, the man, the person? How would you best describe that for the listeners?
Well, so to give you a little bit of a background, I grew up a farm kid in Eastern Ohio, and when I was a decent high school wrestler, but I went to Ohio State with every intention of going home and feeding beef cattle for the rest of my life.
Right.
But when I got there, I was good enough that I was able to walk onto the wrestling team, and immediately started suffering problems with injuries. And as I was trying to figure out, okay, what's it take to be able to compete at this level? You got to get healthy, first of all. Yeah. That the work that I was doing in animal science, well, it's nice because we're animals too. And whether it's a cow or a pig, a lot of the physiology is the same. And I found myself sitting in my animal science classes saying, well, if it works this way for a pig, maybe I should do it this way. And so I started to put science towards my training and not just reacting and doing what someone else had done before me.
Okay.
Just fell in love with human physiology at that point, and wound up, finished my degree in animal science, but went ahead and did my master's degree in exercise physiology at OSU while I was there. And when I graduated in 1986, literally, I had one of my first personal training jobs. So this is a long time ago. We're going on 40 years now.
Gotcha.
So started working with people, started training some athletes, did some work with some professional basketball players and some professional football players, a lot of college guys, and worked. And while I was training and working in management, I also started teaching. So from then till now, what has transpired is I've been a professor for almost 27 years, teaching the exercise sciences. but I've always kept a foot in industry, or I've always kept a stable of elite athletes that I've worked with. In 2015 through 18, I was a sports scientist back at Ohio State, working with the wrestling program. And, we were measuring 3.5 million data points on a wrestling team per season. And we got to the point to where I was able to predict who would make All-American the first day of the National Wrestling Tournament.
Oh, wow.
Using a thing called heart rate variability. I don't know if your audience has heard about this yet, but it's a popular key performance indicator and biometric that's emerging. In that work, I had, interestingly, I had some pro guys reaching out to me asking questions about what I knew about HRV and cannabis. And I'm like, I don't know anything about it, but because my guys are NCAA athletes, it's against the rules for them. But I started to investigate this a little bit, and through a connection, I wound up living down in Florida, working with a big cannabis company down there. And I did a deep dive into understanding, there's part of your nervous system is called the endocannabinoid system.
Right,
most people don't know this.
Yeah,
and literally, it should be chapter 2 of Exercise 101. And having been a professor, I've taught the exercise sciences for nearly 30 years, and I'd never heard the word. All of a sudden, you dive in, you understand, you learn what endocannabinoid system is. You start to learn what the role of cannabinoids, cannabis, terpenes, things like that. And that's what led me to this company. A guy I was working with down in Florida calls me one day, and he says, "What do you know about autophagy?" And I said, "Well, I passively recognize it." He says, "What do you know about spermidine?" And I said, "That's new to me. I've never heard of that." He sends me a TED talk from a researcher in Austria by a doctor named Dr. Frank Medeo. And you start to do this deep dive into this concept of autophagy and its role in longevity. And so this is what brought me from back as a farm kid in Eastern Ohio to a director of applied science for a company working in the longevity space. That's kind of the introduction to that and how I got to where I am today.
No, that's a great introduction. I mean, it just start from your love of just overall understanding like the body, how it works as far as the overall mechanics and everything, to being introduced to, of course, like things like heart rate variability, which is something that is not talked about enough, on top of course, the endocannabinoid system, because I'm a firm believer in using cannabis just for recovery purposes just alone, because with myself, with how much I work out, I use it myself just for overall recovery purposes, and it makes a tremendous difference on top of all the other routine self-care routine things that I do mixed in on top of that, without a doubt. But my biggest thing to me that stuck out to all of this is that how come we have not heard of autophagy? How come we're barely just hearing about spermidine? Because I remember when I was introduced to this, like not even a week ago, I even had to look into it myself. I was like, okay, so these products kind of aid to human longevity. Well, I mean, human longevity is great. I mean, I'm all for adding years onto my life versus taking away years from my life. I mean, I know we're all going to eventually die, but I'm trying to fulfill every single day and kind of stretch it out as long as I can until that day comes. To the people who are listening, Don, how come we are barely just hearing about autophagy? How come we're just barely learning about spermidine? And how is this important to just extending human longevity because of these things?
Well, I think the answer to your question is because it's relatively new. So this term autophagy, that they gave a Nobel Prize in 2016 to the Japanese researcher that fully described the genetics that drive the autophagy process. So that's relatively, that's not a decade ago. So they gave the Nobel Prize in 16. This isn't in med school yet. This isn't in textbooks yet. So it's a relatively new concept. And then we've known about spermidine for a long time. In fact, the guy that invented the microscope. His name was Anton van Leeuwenhoek, and I think this was 1697. Now, he was obviously a freak because he has this microscope, and all of a sudden he's got semen under his looking at, trying to figure out if his swimmers look like him or not.
Right,
and
right.
This is the first time we've ever looked at microscopic things. Who knows if we had given the microscope to a woman, how much further along we'd be now than if we gave it to him. But but he described this crystalline structure in semen. Now, that crystalline structure description stayed there for nearly 200 years. Mm-hmm. And then a group of Dutch scientists named it spermidine. There's sperm and semen. So if this other thing is, let's call it spermidine. Now, Clifton, we didn't know what it did for a long time.
Right.
In the 80s, they were looking at spermidine and its relationship to cancer. They couldn't find a relationship there, but that Nobel Prize was a turning point. And then a researcher at the University of Graz in Austria, his name was Dr. Frank Medeo, took spermidine that had been extracted from wheat germ and used it to treat what is called senescent cells. These are, we call these zombie cells a lot of times. These are cells that are alive, but they're no longer functioning. They're not making the proteins. They're not doing a thing. Well, he treated these cells with spermidine, and he saw that it began to reverse the senescence in that. Okay. Now, so this is when we had a hint of, oh, there's a benefit there. Well, now there's been multiple layers of research, volumes and volumes of research that have gone into understanding autophagy, its relationship to longevity, and spermidine's role in that process. In fact, we have books being written every day. It's hard to open up Amazon and not find a book on longevity, and it's not referencing autophagy. And what's important, Clifton, to note here is that this autophagy concept, we've known the value of autophagy for thousands of years. We just didn't know how or what, because every major religious practice involves fasting.
Yes, it does.
And fasting is the primary trigger for autophagy. Now, fasting drives it, exercise drives it. And when you have something, we call autophagy an evolutionarily preserved process. So it goes from fruit flies to worms, C. elegans, to mice, to dogs, to humans. We see it across the animal kingdom, the value of autophagy. We just haven't always understood how and why. But again, that Nobel Prize, we start to see the genetics of this. We start to understand when we take calories away from cells so that we don't have the signaling molecules that comes with insulin and IGF, that when you eat protein or you eat a carbohydrate, your body sees that, your pancreas sends out a note that says, hey, there's calories coming. Here's some insulin to help you deal with that. So it's a signaling molecule. And with proteins, it's called IGF. Well, this stops the autophagy process in the cell. But when we don't have those signals going in, when we don't have the insulin, when we don't have the IGF because we're fasting, the cell takes a look at it and says, wait a minute, we don't have the energy coming in, so let's go ahead and clean up inside. And this is when the autophagy process begins. So it triggers autophagy. When your cells are working, they're typically making proteins, but they don't make all their proteins correctly. So sometimes you got to go in and clean those proteins up. Well, an example of too many misproduced proteins would be Alzheimer's disease. You have the development of tau proteins in the neural cells, and this leads. So if you want to prevent Alzheimer's, fasting, autophagy are good processes here. And it turns out at a cellular level, this autophagy that comes it helps with many of the diseases that take us out as we get older. When I do my talks, I put a picture up of what's going to kill you depending on the age you're at. So when you're very young, childhood, the thing that typically kills you is either accidents or genetic diseases. And then as you get to middle age, you're doing the things that your mom told you shouldn't do. You're riding a bike without a helmet. You're driving a car without a seatbelt. There's a lot of accidents that take you out. Yep. But when we go ahead and when we get past 40 years old, the things that start to take you out are things like cancer, poor immune response, cardiovascular
obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure. You can go on and on and on.
Metabolic diseases that are driven by inflammation. And what we've learned, Clifton, as autophagy goes up, inflammation goes down. And this is really important when you start to look at it. And I like the thing that you say about not just having more years in your life. I like putting more life in my years. And one of the struggles that we have right now is that the average American can expect a lifespan of 76 years. Lifespan. That's the number of days they're breathing. Right. But we have another thing that's called health span. And if you've studied, you've heard this term morbidity and mortality. Mortality is lifespan. Morbidity is the onset of disease. And this is what we have and right now the average health span for Americans is 62 years. So lifespan is 76, health span is 62. So we have 12 years. Most people have 12 years at the end of their life where they're dealing with disease that's leading to morbidity and mortality. So how do you prevent that? And this is where longevity research comes into play. The number one thing that drives it is lowering inflammation, improving autophagy. Now, spermidine comes into play because what we've learned when we first started looking at spermidine, we referred to it as a calorie restriction mimetic. It mimics fasting. Well,
that actually was going to feed into what I was going to ask you next, actually, Don, as far as for the people who are listening and who keep hearing spermidine, what is that exactly? What does it exactly focus on exactly? Kind of break that down more in details of how does spermidine work as far as helping improving the autophagy?
So spermidine is what's called a polyamine. Now, your audience is probably familiar with a term called amino acid.
Oh, yeah.
So an amino acid is one of the building blocks of proteins.
Yes, it is.
And if you take an amino acid and you cleave the acid part off of it, you're left with a polyamine. So an amine is a nitrogen molecule with the accompanying hydrogens that hooks to carbons. Spermidine is a 3-nitrogen polyamine, and it comes in a family. There's a precursor called putrescine. There's one that comes after it that's called spermine, but these are all important tools in cellular metabolism. What we found is that spermidine is critical in triggering the genes that drive autophagy. So the autophagy process, a gene has to be set into place. It needs to be activated. Spermidine is critical in this process. And Clifton, I'll tell you on this podcast, this is a little bit talking out of school. We have a paper that we expect to be published in the next 2 weeks in Nature that if you take a model organism, like I said, a fruit fly, a worm, a mouse, and you block spermidine production in their cells. There's a way we can do this with some drugs. We block a thing called spermidine synthase, which actually converts putrescine to spermidine. But if you block that, even if you fast, you don't get autophagy at the same level. Okay? This is really important. So now we extract our spermidine from wheat germ that is grown in Europe. We cannot find spermidine-rich wheat germ in the United States. With our industrial growing processes, this is one of the micronutrients that's getting washed out. That's why we have to get ours from Europe, because the rules for growing in Europe and the United States are very different with GMOs and the things that go with that. So the process, as you start to see the escalation of inflammation and inflammatory related diseases, and you said it, whether it's metabolic disorder, cardiovascular disease, cancers, things like that, these are all inflammatory related diseases. Well, if you go back and take a look at the onset of commercial agriculture and you see it start to grow, you're going to see a drop in spermidine. You're going to see a drop in inflammation. You're going to see a drop in autophagy. You're going to see poorer health span, eventually leading to poorer lifespan.
Mm-hmm. So it all ties together in a way, just going back to just like, hey, it's a way to where it could kind of just take control of just overall your morbidity and your mortality, just to help improve all those things as far as just not only your lifespan, but most importantly, the health span, especially when I look at all the research that it actually does and everything. It's incredible, and it blows my mind what it does. The one thing that kind of sticks out to me as far as the things that it does, it helps out with the heart, it helps out with the brain health, it helps out with just so many variety of things, which are crucial to, of course, just the regular total body functions that the body needs to sustain its overall life. And it's incredible as far as like the potential of what spermidine can do from an overall science perspective within itself. And it definitely needs to be researched a little bit more. It definitely needs to be marketed a little bit more, because in my eyes, Don, and I feel like you and I can both agree on this, I think it's coming down to the point where we need to heal our communities more versus killing our communities. And I feel like spermidine can definitely be like a good first step in exactly doing that. And from your perspective, based off of all the work you've done within the research within spermidine and autophagy and everything, like when you mix in the science aspect of it, what kind of sense of direction do you feel like it could potentially go into towards, as far as just to how spermidine can continue to heal people, most importantly? Like, do you feel like science will get in the way, or do you feel like it will actually benefit even more if we dive into the research?
No, the research just keeps getting better. We've got some great stuff coming out, and that's one of the fun things about working for this company. And listen, Clifton, if you go back to the 1400s, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We took a boat, we stacked a bunch of humans on it. Now, for Columbus to go from Portugal to the islands in the Caribbean, it took about 33 days.
Right.
And they're able to pack enough food on there that they get through without a problem. But you move forward another century into the age of piracy, when people were living on boats for extended periods of time. And one of the things that we saw develop there was a disease that was called scurvy. Right. Scurvy was a vitamin C deficiency that developed in these sailors. Now, not everybody got scurvy. The people on the boat that ate the rats that were on the boat didn't get scurvy because rats produce their own vitamin C. Those who didn't eat the rats had to take citrus fruit to keep from developing scurvy. And this is the onset of an essential nutrient. This was the first essential nutrient, and that was vitamin C, ascorbic acid. Right. Now, we just keep going through time. So it's science that gives us the ability to understand what has been taken out of our environment. Again, you pack a bunch of people on a boat, you put them on the ocean, their environment changes dramatically. If you're only on for 30 days, that's one thing. When you're on for an extended period of time, it's different. You have to approach it differently. And so we now live in a time that's interesting. And Clifton, I don't know how you grew up. I grew up on a big farm in eastern Ohio. My family, we had 2 1-acre gardens. And those 2 1-acre gardens got fertilized with the manure that came out of the barns that we raised cattle and pigs and chickens and the whole thing. And the food that came out of those gardens was unbelievable. And we didn't know what it was back then. But now, listen, I can go to the best grocery store going, and you can't even come close to the tomatoes that we used to grow in that garden. They were so nutrient dense. Right. Well, so much of our society has moved into what I call aquariums. You know, I do a talk and I show an orca, a killer whale in the wild. And a killer whale in the wild, their dorsal fins are typically straight. But if you take that same orca and you put them in an aquarium, like at a park like SeaWorld, their dorsal fins typically bend over. There's not enough environmental force for that orca to express their DNA of a straight dorsal fin. Well, the question is what happens when we change our aquariums? You know, you're in a room with a window, you're looking out. I actually live in an RV and we travel all over the country. So there's certainly it's a different environment, but our environments are changing. Our food sources are changing, and we have to be aware of what is not there. And that's the beauty of science. Now, okay, so let's take the problem with science. If you decide you want to look at perhaps supplementing spermidine, that's great. You go to Amazon like we all do. You Google spermidine. Well, we used to be the only option that came up. We're a food extract. We come from wheat germ. We're a whole food extract. Now, when you go to Amazon, you see a bunch of synthetic spermidines up there that have never been studied in humans. Actually, there's 2 studies going on now. Safety's never been looked at in synthetic spermidine, but it's all over things like Amazon. When you compare it to our products, it's much less expensive. It looks like it has a lot more spermidine, but it doesn't have that whole plant extract. And again, there's no science for safety right now. We've measured safety in our product up to 20 milligrams a day. Our most concentrated product is 6 milligrams a day. The European Union has said we can sell 12 milligram a day products. No one's asking for that. Again, physicians can purchase 6 milligram products from us. Most people are buying 2 to 3 milligram products. So this is the challenge. You asked the question about science. It's important that you're following the entire scientific process. The scientific process is hypothesize, you design a test, you execute the test, you collect the data, you analyze the data, you re-hypothesize, and you start again. That is science. That is the scientific process. Just because someone sits on a podcast and says, oh, here's this thing, and they sound scientific, doesn't mean they're doing science, okay? You have to measure the impact, and you've got to be able to make some decisions that give you the ability to re-hypothesize better. And listen, Clifton, we do this every time we design a workout. I want to be bigger, faster, stronger, skinnier, whatever their goal is. You create an experiment. You execute the experiment, you collect data. Did I get stronger? Did I get bigger? Did I get skinnier? Did I get this? You look at it after and say, okay, I need to re-hypothesize with this individual. It's probable that Clifton Pope responds to different stimuli than what Don Moxley does.
Exactly.
It's probable. But it's because you have a workout doesn't mean it fits everybody. And that's one of the challenges that we have with the exercise community right now, is someone learns their trick pony and they try to apply it to everybody. And that's a huge mistake. But
because everybody's different. Everybody is different because everybody is different, to add on to everything that you just said, Don. And I completely agree, because at the end of the day, that's all that this is, really. It's a very unique, different science experiment, and we're just going through the tests, trying to get the results to see what we could get out of these tests, to where we can continue to find room for improvement, and just studying really how our overall cells for the people who are listening to the HFWB podcast series. I want to emphasize this, and Don could agree with this. Our cells are the key to aging well and to good overall health. I mean, they're basically the blueprint for everything we are and everything that we become. And basically it's like it's all the nutrients being tied in through the food throughout the body. I mean, we can go on and on how our cells help store and release oxygen, create energy. And most importantly, our cells, I don't think people realize this, and you know this better than me, Don, our cells communicate with each other just to maintain our overall health. So I feel like with the work that you're doing in studying autophagy, the work that you're doing as far as just bringing the topic of discussion for spermidine to the table, it's needed. And I feel like this could be a huge game breaker in 2024 and beyond, just to help add on years to our life, people, versus take away years from our life. I think that's the theme for this episode. And I feel like this is a great discussion overall within itself. And it's pretty much how we can all just continue to really just go out and feel great, because Once again, this episode of the HFWB podcast series is being brought to you by my sponsor, goandfeelgreat.com. Go and check them out right now, without a doubt. We're actually going to transition, Don, into a list of questions that I basically ask everybody who comes onto the podcast, just to kind of give people an idea of who you are a little bit more as a person and just get to know you a little bit better, without a doubt. First question is this, Don. What's the first thing you do or think of every single day you wake up?
What's the first? Well, I'm usually thinking about my wife and my daughter. Family. I'm a family guy, so that's the big thing.
Got you. Now, the big thing with the HFWB podcast series, people know me best for saying health is wealth, because they're kind of go hand in hand. They're two sides of the coin, without a doubt. In your own personal definition, Don, what is health and wealth to yourself?
So, health is a funny thing. I like to think of it. I like to think, what are the key performance indicators that I'm using to define, am I healthy or not? And I don't like to get hung up in the medical community. The three I like are, am I happy, am I hungry, and am I horny? Those are things that will definitely satisfy any man. That is without a doubt. I can agree with that. So my health typically revolves around, if I'm happy, am I moving? Am I doing the things I love to do?
Yes.
I tell a story, Clifton, that my daughter, who is now a coach at the University of Pittsburgh, she moved out of our house 2 years ago. And I looked at my wife at that time, and we bought the house when my daughter was born. So we bought the house for her, and I looked at her and I said, we're done. I said, she's got a job now. She was coaching at Northwestern at the time. I said, she's got a job. I go, she's not coming home. We've done our job. And I like to think of life in 3/3. You spend the first third of your life learning, and then you spend the second third of your life earning in service to others, raising family, doing work. But then we have what's called our third. That's my third. Okay. It's me and my wife. It's our ability to do what we want to do. I'm not worrying about doing things for the people I work for. Although I love my work and I expect to work every day I'm alive. I also want to completely enjoy this process. So we're in our third. When my daughter moved out, we're in our third. And my wife and I said, we want to drink our coffee in the morning looking at mountains. And at the time we lived in Ohio, we were on the edge of the Corn Belt. There weren't mountains there. And so we sold our house, bought an RV, and we've been traveling in the West now for almost 22 months, looking for a new place to live. So I go back to your original question. What is health? What is wealth? Listen, wealth is having the assets necessary to enjoy life.
Simple as that.
So whether it's cash or emotional, or there's a lot of things that go into that, and health. And again, health for me is going back to, can I move? Can I do the things to be happy, healthy, and horny? Yeah,
and it just comes down, really, Don, just to add to everything you just said, which I agree with completely. It's just utilizing your time wisely and making sure time is working for you versus against you, because you never want to have time working against you, because it's a very miserable feeling, especially for everyone who's listening to the HFWB podcast series. Definitely take that into consideration. When you think of community, Don, what pops up to your mind as far as your idea of community?
Community is really interesting, and it's really changing. COVID has driven a lot of this and so forth. So again, I work for a company, and I just need internet access and access to an airport. Friday, I climb on an airplane to go to a conference down in Palm Beach. I'll see a bunch of my friends there. So community is constantly driving these human interactions wherever they are. Again, that's the big part of it for me. And that community can come a lot of ways. I mean, social media done correctly can be a wonderful form of community. Yes, I love being, I wrestled at Ohio State. The Big Ten championships were this weekend. My phone was firing all weekend
because of that community built within the social media.
Because of the community. And there were guys, the Big Tens were in Maryland. but the rest of us are spread across the country. You know, there was a little bit of my heart hurt a little bit. I haven't said this to my wife yet, but I want to make sure and go to Big Tens next year again, because, and it was funny because one of my former teammates sends me a picture of the back of the head of the guy from Michigan that I beat in the finals of the Big Tens back in 1985. And it's one of those relationships where he's kind of poking me. He says, this guy's talking about you. But it's that shared experience that we've had that we're able to leverage and grow. And again, we can do this a lot of ways. I've got high school friends, I've got college friends, I've got work friends. I mean, it's being able to connect and integrate with that is the concept of community to me.
I love it. I love it. And with that being said, it's like those interactions, whether it's like in person, online, it really just makes a difference as far as just finding common ground, as far as like developing that certain level of like respect for one another, no matter different backgrounds or whatever the case may be. It's just coming together, being united as one, to where we could stand strong together versus being divided to where we'll fall apart side by side, or on opposite sides, of course, just like that.
Sure.
But overall, Don, we're actually going to make a little bit of a pivot into more of an either or segment, to where I'll ask you either or which one you would pick out of course, the two suggestions. My first one is this, Don. What would you rather have out of loyalty or respect?
I would probably say respect.
It's a tough one because they really go hand in hand, because I would have to agree with that, but you can't go wrong with either or, but I would lean slightly more towards respect myself. I'm not going to lie on that. Would you rather live in space or the ocean?
Probably the ocean.
Would you rather be famous and poor or anonymous and rich?
I don't need fame. I enjoy interacting with people, and I don't know what fame. I don't know what fame is. You know, I want just enough money to be able to do what I need to do and take care of the people I need to take care of, and then once we're there, I'm good.
Sometimes it's the simple things in life that make a really big difference, without a doubt. Excuse me. Would you rather have unlimited free meals at your favorite restaurant or unlimited first class tickets?
I would say first class tickets.
Can't go wrong with that. You cannot go wrong with that. Would you rather dance to every song or sing to every song?
Dance.
Now, picture this scenario I'm about to paint for you, Don. You're on an island. You're trapped on this island, right? But you have the opportunity to listen to 5 of your favorite music artists. It doesn't matter what genre of music it is. It can be their whole catalog of music. Who would those 5 artists be?
This is a great question. So it started off with Bruce Springsteen. I'm a Springsteen guy from way back.
Okay.
I cut my teeth on Springsteen back in college.
It goes deep. It goes real deep. Gotcha.
It's old. It's embedded. Born to Run. I wore that album out. So on top of that, I really love the artists that made up the band Cream. Those guys have Steve Winwood and Eric Clapton and all those guys. So you can either take them together or spread them. But I really like the work that they did.
We'll include it as one for this particular one. I'll count that as one.
We move on, and probably someone who, when I'm doing a long drive and I'm at the end of the drive and I've got to power through it. One of the artists that always comes on is Kenny Chesney.
Okay.
And it's probably not fair to separate Kenny Chesney and Jimmy Buffett, but they're same genre. And then probably the last one I'd throw in there is the Dixie Chicks. We really like the Chicks in our family. We've seen them in concert many times, and I just like their vibe.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. We all vibe to our own sound and our own vibrations, and there's nothing wrong with that because that's what the universe. That's what makes the universe so much so limitless and so flexible within itself. It provides different varieties of vibrations and sounds that pretty much anybody can relate to, depending on what they feel most comfortable with, without a doubt. And overall, excuse me, Don, what is your favorite go-to meal?
My favorite go-to meal. So I have talked about what I call my 3 favorite meals I've ever eaten. And one of those, again, we raised club calves in Eastern Ohio. And one of those calves did not do as well in the show, and it wound up going to the slaughterhouse. But it came home, and we had a porterhouse steak that came out of that calf that was cut about 1 inch thick that would cover your dinner plate. And you didn't need a knife to cut it. The marbling was so good. So it's the memory of that keeps bringing me back to great steak dinners.
You can never go wrong with a classic steak dinner. I'll take that any day of the week for sure. Now, we talked about this before we started the recording, and at the same time you alluded to this. You definitely have a little bit of a traveling bug within you, Don, and there's nothing wrong with that. Out of all the places you have traveled, where is the favorite place you've traveled to thus far? And at the same time, Don, where's a place you would like to travel to that you have never been before?
So the second part of that question, I think probably Australia, New Zealand. I have some friends that are from Australia, New Zealand. They're athletes down there. They've spent time with us in our home up in Ohio. Okay. And I'd love to get down and explore those areas.
All right.
So my favorite place. So again, my wife and I are looking for a new home. We're looking for a new place to stay, and we've been some great places. Probably the most beautiful place I've ever been to is Lake Tahoe, California.
I've heard a couple of people who've told me that as well. It's something about Lake Tahoe that's so beautiful and peaceful and relaxing. It's like
you can go ski a great ski mountain on either end of the lake, and literally get to the bottom of the lift, click out of your boots, and go down and step into Lake Tahoe. It's gorgeous.
I believe it.
We really like that, and I'll tell you, in Colorado, there's a little community in central Colorado that's called Salida. It's in the Buena Vista Valley, and it's the collegiate peaks, Mount Princeton, Mount Yale are there, and this is a really cool place. Salida as a community is really cool. Lots of rainbow flags, lots of art installs, things like. But you still have the Western culture that comes with Colorado. There's lots of cowboy hats and things like that. So we really liked that area. The reason we're not there is because it's a little too far from an airport for me. So that's part of this is, we've been some really cool places in the last 22 months. The coast of Oregon is, when the rest of the country was 110 degrees last summer, we had gone down to Crater Lake in Oregon and gone to see Crater Lake, and we were driving back through the Willamette Valley, and the Willamette River runs kind of the length north to south of Oregon. And it was 97, 90 degrees in the Willamette Valley, but as we drove up out of the valley into our site, which was about 500 meters from the ocean, the marine layer was blowing in, and the temperature dropped to 55 degrees in June.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty nice.
Wow, 55 degrees in June. That sounds like something. If that were to happen here in South Texas, where I'm at, people would lose their mind and think that the world is ending, because that is something we are not used to in the month of June.
It was, we just, again, this has been part of our exploration. We spent 6 months in Oregon and Washington. We spent we spent July through December in that area. We really like the Pacific Northwest. And in fact, we were looking at property way up in Northwest Washington, Mount Baker, the North Cascades. Did you see Maverick, Top Gun? Did you see that movie?
Yes.
So a lot of those flight scenes when they're in the mountains were filmed up in the North Cascades.
Area. Okay.
And I'll tell you what, the Pacific Northwest, when it's nice, it's glorious.
That's definitely a bucket list item I'll have to include. And everybody who's listening to the HFWB podcast series, you heard it here first. If you haven't been to the Pacific Northwest, go out there, go visit it once in your lifetime. And I'm definitely going to add that to my list without a doubt. Now, Don, I know you're a busy guy. You're constantly on the road, constantly traveling, doing the things that you're doing. And by all means, definitely keep doing that. But whenever you have a time to just kick back, relax, kind of unwind yourself a little bit, what are some of your favorite hobbies you like to do that many people may not know you like to do?
So I've not been able to do this since we've gone on the road, but I'm a woodworker.
Okay.
I grew up on a big farm. It was my job to fix things. And so I can burn steel. I can make things, do these things. So I kind of miss right now. My workshop is in my buddy's barn until we find a new place to set up camp. So probably woodworking and building things is what I like is what I really enjoy.
There's nothing wrong with that at all. I mean, somebody has to build all of these things that we want to enjoy. So I appreciate you taking on the challenge and the task at hand to, of course, do that without a doubt, Don. My last question for you as we wrap everything up slowly but surely. If you had the opportunity, right, to go back in time to talk to yourself, say about 10 years ago, what would you tell yourself, Don, in that situation? And at the same time, based on your current journey that you are on, where do you see yourself going in the next 10 years?
So I'd go back farther than 10. I'd probably go back 40.
Okay.
Listen, I've been married for 33 years. Dated my wife for 30. We've been dating or married for 35 years. But I'd go back to when I was in school, and what I would say is that proceed less fearfully. I grew up in a Baptist church out there in Eastern Ohio, and we had a preacher, Bob Merritt, and I'm telling you what, we did Revelations 9 months a year. And most Sundays, your feet got hot because you're pretty sure hell was coming through the floor. And I no longer fear. I feared then. I no longer fear now. I believe in love. I believe love is critical.
Yes, it is.
And at the end of the day, whether you want to call it a God or the universe or whatever, I believe love is the tool we use to communicate, to live together. And I think that's important. And I think that the better job we do of that, of passionately loving what you do, I'm able to do that now. I love what I do. Okay. Yeah. I will do this until my last breath. And Clifton, what's so cool, even having been an academic, even being an academic, I tell people that I learned more last year than I had my lifetime before that. And I expect to learn more this year than I have up until this point. That's how fast things are changing. Yep. And so I love being engaged in that process and knowing that we don't have all the answers. There's stuff coming around the corner all the time. And at the end of the day, you get through this thing. We talked about communities. At the end of the day, it's about love.
That's perfectly well said. And I agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, and to add to that, as a matter of fact, it's really just all about telling ourselves, really, Don, that we need to love ourselves unconditionally because we're worthy of this love. And at the same time, we really need to be open not only to receiving love, but most importantly, giving love.
Absolutely.
Because in order to receive love, you have to give it first. You can't just go around expecting people to love you if you don't love them first. It's like a give or take type of thing. So I feel like that's a great way and a magnificent way, as a matter of fact, to end this particular episode of the HFWB podcast series. Love yourself. That way others can love you, love your family, and just real simple. I mean, love yours. Love
Pretty
yours
straightforward.
without a doubt. With that being said, Don, how can people get in contact with you as far as following your journey? How can people get in a hold of some of the spermidine we've been talking about? Kind of give out all the details, Don. Now's the time.
So if you want to follow me, probably the best place to do it is on LinkedIn.
Okay.
You search for Don Moxley on LinkedIn. If you request to follow or join, use some explanation of, I heard you on this podcast or something like that. If you request a connection and you say, hey, the system put us together, I'm probably going to reject it. Because I don't like that playing around.
Right.
But just say, I heard it on podcast. I've got a question. I have, with this job, I've developed some wonderful relationships with people that heard me on podcasts. They reached out. Now we have regular relationships that go very well. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm not nearly as active on Twitter as I used to be. That who knows where that platform's going. But really, LinkedIn's the place to find me. If you want to learn more about spermidine, you can go to spermidinelife.us, spermidinelife.us. That's how you learn about spermidine.
Yes, and for everybody who's currently listening to this particular episode of the HFWB podcast series and who wants to take their life more seriously as far as from a longevity standpoint, I highly recommend that you rewind this whole entire episode from start to finish. That way we can just let this information sink in and let it marinate, because human longevity is a real thing, people. We need to continue to add more years onto our life versus taking things away. We need to continue to basically get rid of all of these health problems that we're constantly fighting over and over and over again. And I feel like with your particular product, along with my overall potential sponsor, just Go and Feel Great, just getting all these products out there that can help make a difference from everybody who's currently suffering from these pre-existing health conditions. Because really, it's all about just going out there and just feeling great about ourselves. I mean, it's kind of like my overall sponsorship that's currently being sponsored by basically goandfeelgreat.com. I mean, we need more natural products designed to help restore our metabolic health and just, of course, get out there and feel great for the long haul, which is why you need to go and visit goandfeelgreat.com without a doubt. And Don, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to simply bless us with an appearance on the HFWB podcast series. I learned a lot and look forward to just continuing to build the relationship that's beginning to form, my friend.
It's been my pleasure.
Of course. And with that being said, I want to thank everybody for listening to the HFWB podcast series. This is your host, Clifton Pope, and I encourage everybody to stay healthy, wealthy, and blessed. Peace, love, and positive vibrations, everybody. Till next time.